Do you enjoy reading? Do you enjoy reading short stories? Do you enjoy reading scary stories? Then I have just the thing for you, Stories of the Bizarre and Terrifying Omnibus 1, a complete collection of all of my short stories so far in one handy little collection. It also comes with a handful of neat little extras, including a glossary of all the creatures and forces I've created over the years, author's notes providing insight into my creative process and inspirations, and even 2 all-new short stories that function as proof of concepts for 2 ideas I've had for much bigger works. If you're at all interested, feel free to check out the links in the description. It's available in both ebook, paperback, and for the first time ever, hardcover.
You guys really don't want me.
To say I was looking forward to Phantom Fury would be an understatement. I have fond high school memories of playing the Xbox 360 port of Duke Nukem 3D, I loved its spiritual successor Ion Fury, and I found Bombshell to be more fun than I expected, and rather underrated. So I was eager to try out Phantom Fury and see what 3D Realms and Slipgate Ironworks had cooked up. Let me tell you, this game really needed more time in the kitchen because it ended up like a noodle dish from a low-end Chinese takeaway shop. Bursts of delicious flavour, smothered in a bland, unappealing, oily texture. First things first, level interactivity is just as good as it was in Ion Fury, possibly better even. But what is certainly a novelty these days, being able to interact with things like light switches, sinks, lockers, and other useless pieces of the environment still has the same charm it had back when the build engine was the cutting edge of software. Now, thanks to the true 3D space, the game can allow for much finer detail, which leads to more precise interaction, like selecting specific soda cans from a vending machine. This allowed the devs to throw in all sorts of hidden health recovery that reward the player for actually exploring and prodding the environment. It also needs to be said that Phantom Fury takes inspiration from Half-Life, so there's a sense of practicality when it comes to the layout and placement of the interactables, so it makes sense for them to be there for reasons that go beyond just because video. This can also be said about the weapon and health pickups, and the enemies you encounter during a level. It's just a shame that the Half-Life inspirations beyond this are painfully wasted. Part of what made Half-Life stand out was not only the realistic practicality of its world, but also how the player had to interact with the game's physics engine to solve puzzles and progress. A natural evolution for Duke Nukem 3D game design. Interaction that requires more than just flipping switches. So why the hell isn't it here then? You rarely need to interact with the game's physics at all in order to progress. Most of the time when you're facing a locked path and there isn't a keycard to open a door, you just need to run up to a power box and give it a good shock with your shock baton. The only time I can recall where I had to do anything other in order to progress was at the very beginning of the game, during the tutorial where I had to stack a crate in order to jump through a gap. Yeah, you can look through office computers for progress as well as shits and grins, or pick up and throw exploding crates and drums, but it's just not enough. It just reeks of wasted potential how little the game actually demands you interact with its world, regardless of how many hidden health recoveries are scattered throughout it. A sequence that really drives this home is the bar sequence.
God bless America.
Now, to be fair, I do love this sequence. It's a nice break from the action in the first third of the game. We are free to explore a roadside bar full of GDF troops on break, relaxing with drinks, yapping it up and having a good time. The player is free to explore the bar, have a few drinks themselves, and try out the arcade minigames as they work out how to unlock the back door to progress. However, there is a pool table. It has pool balls. You can pick up pool cues. But you cannot use the cues on the table to play an impromptu game of pool. There's a pinball machine you can play, but you can't use a pool cue for its intended purpose? What the hell? But what wasn't wasted was the weapon arsenal. Phantom Fury offers a genuinely varied selection of guns for the player to enjoy. From practical to the borderline useless, Phantom Fury's guns do not disappoint. We get 2 different flavors of shotgun, Shelly's 18-chamber revolver, the Loverboy, it's back. There's at least 3 different flavors of assault rifle, and so on and so on. You also get the severed head of a psychic mutant, and this thing pulls enemies up into the air before slamming them down into a bloody pancake. It's slow to use and slower to recharge, but it's fun to play around with. Hell, we even get to meet John Blade from Sin, and he loans you his Magnum, and that's just the weapons themselves. Throw in the secondary firing modes and upgrades that can drastically change how these guns function, and towards the end, it starts to feel like this game was at one point going to be a prototype for a competitor to Borderlands. These guns are always fun to use, and while some of the sound effects on them can be rather lackluster, it's not enough to detract from the fun of jibbing enemies. Phantom Fury also introduces special abilities that feel like a simple but logical evolution for the gameplay, building on what Ion Fury did. Granted, you'll almost exclusively use the punch attack, and that's just because it's a solid go-to. When you're in a tough situation, low on health and ammo, the punch can be the linchpin that lets you come out on top. It's also balls of fun learning when to use these abilities alongside the guns, getting into a satisfying rhythm of shooting, punching, and whatever else you have up your sleeve, and coming out on top with no worse for wear or by the skin of your teeth.
Nothing can stop me now.
But the diversity doesn't end with the weapons. The levels in Phantom Fury are just as varied. We start out in a secret medical facility that's been sabotaged, to fighting our way through the Nevada desert, chilling out in a bar before shooting through mutants in a research facility, and more. Each level has a distinct look to it. There's never a point where it feels like you're trudging through the same place again and again. It also helps that the game knows when the level should end, so they never feel too dragged out, and they have enough set pieces to shake things up, to keep things fresh. Like running through a secret base whose laser security changes the layout between objectives, or running between the carriages of a roaring train before fighting an attack helicopter as it shreds through the cargo acting as flimsy cover. However, there are times where the level layout is undermined by one specific thing, and that's a portion of the level being too open for its own good. I'm not joking, there are some areas that are just too open. This has the effect of whatever is meant to nudge the player in the right direction are either too far apart or just rendered too obtuse, so there are times where you'll be struggling to figure out where to go for one reason or another. The Cabin in the Woods segment is the worst offender of this. Thanks to some last minute backtracking being needed to progress, and a prominent barn you'd think would be important, but turns out it's just window dressing of all things. When you run into one of these areas, it can be nothing short of dull tedium just trying to figure out where the hell you're meant to go. However, the enemy AI is a much bigger issue than some poorly communicated level areas. Simply put, the enemy AI is just stupid. While there is some variety in enemy tactics, they are still often some flavour of the default strategy: bum rush the player. Now, to be fair, this is more of an issue with certain enemies than others, but it's still annoying across the board. The GDF grunts are the worst offenders. They'll constantly break cover and amble about without any sense of tactics or self-preservation. Seeing these guys brought back memories of the companion AI from Operation Raccoon City. With the other enemies, their bum rushing is more forgivable. This is thanks to their tactics revolving around things like tanking, throwing interactable objects, melee, and suicide bombing. However, as much as I don't like using this excuse because it breeds laziness, but of all the things this game has, this is the one that can be most easily fixed with some patches sooner or later. So hopefully we'll see the GDF function like an actual unit before the year is out. Something that's almost as annoying is the game's technical performance. Now, most of the time, it ran perfectly fine, I can't stress that enough, but it was during the second third of the game that I noticed some performance issues. The frame rate would fluctuate with the game going from running smooth and fast, then starting to chug along at a slower pace. The hardware on my desktop is more than adequate to run this type of game. Hell, Crysis 3 ran butter smooth on the high settings back when I still had its original GPU. Currently, it's got an Nvidia RTX 3060 for the GPU, an Intel i5-13400 for the processor, and an arseload of RAM. Hell, just look at Phantom Fury's graphics. Really take them in. Does this look like a game that needs mid-tier hardware at least? But if nothing else, the game does run well the majority of the time. It's just that consequently, when these dips in performance happen, they're all the more noticeable because of it. It also needs to be said that everything this game does has already been done before. and better. However, that's not an entirely bad thing. Not everything needs to be a new revolution of innovation. But then again, this game is supposed to be the spiritual successor to what Duke Nukem Forever was trying to be back in the 2000s. So whatever innovation that game's design document had was done by other titles while it collected dust. If nothing else, Phantom Fury does have its fair share of standout moments. Like the bar section I mentioned earlier, there's also the last two boss fights. They offer a decent challenge and are a frenetic change of pace. The soundtrack too has its fair share of great tracks, and while the protagonist Shelley Harrison is your bog standard pseudo-lesbian badass action chick, she has been given some nuance that really makes her stand out. So she's more compelling a character than you'd expect from this style of game. For better and for worse, this is the game Duke Nukem Forever was meant to be. An old school shooter that experimented with ideas that looked good on paper, but made it into the kind of classic that, while it has its charm, everyone agrees hasn't aged as well as other games from that era. At its best, it's a good game. At its worst, it's an average one. And with a price tag of $35, I do have to admit I feel like I got my money's worth. But it also looks like I might be getting more too, since it seems 3D Realms are aware of the final release's shortcomings, and they've already started rolling out patches for it. So if you're planning on checking it out, I would say go for it. But it would be a good idea to wait for another patch or two to roll out first. Unless you can forgive some jank. Well, I certainly kept you all waiting, huh? Sorry this is so late, I've been going through a lot of stuff lately, and it's just been eating up my time or distracting me in the worst ways possible, but hey, better late than never. Up next, I'm planning to take a look at a game that's caught my attention called Jawbreakers, and I've also got two other games that are really piquing my interest. Those are the Ghost of Tsushima PC port and Nine Souls. I got all them more coming up, so please stick around.